Hello. Firstly, I'd like to thank Life Changers Trust and Connecting Carers for giving me this opportunity to speak to you all today about my experience of being a carer, or as I prefer to say, a companion for my husband who has early onset Alzheimer's disease. Standing here today, I'm very aware of all the other carers whose lives have been changed by this cruel disease. So on behalf of my fellow carers, I'm happy to be here and to share some of my experience, our experiences with you. Every carer's story will be different. There's no set route for this journey with Alzheimer's or dementia. It's unique to every person. In November 2011, my husband, Ray, aged 57, went to Regmore Hospital for a day of various tests to check out a memory problem and changes to his behaviour, which had been increasing over a span of 12 years or so. All the results came through a month later. The consultant went through the results of the tests, ending with those of the brain scan. And then the words came, this is the only way in which we can diagnose Alzheimer's disease. And I'm very sorry to tell you that this is what you have. I felt as if I'd been shot with a bullet, as it had never crossed my mind that this might be what Ray had. I'd never come across Alzheimer's, been very fortunate within our family. Ray at that time was still working as a self-employed person, as a wildlife guide in Scotland and in parts of Europe, and he also did ecological survey work. This point of diagnosis is where both our worlds changed beyond measure. All our hopes and dreams evaporated. The shock reverberates within for a long time, and for a while I was trying to be Superwoman. My whole life was thrust into a huge change. I will always be Ray's wife, but my main focus was then to accompany him and to look after Ray through the journey with Alzheimer's. In the early days, it was rather smothering at times, and it's easy to start to lose one's identity once given the label of carer. Early on, in order to cope, I had a think and thought we had to do something. And so we hit upon a plan. We decided that there were 3 people in our marriage. There was Ray and myself, and there was Jimmy. And sometimes Jimmy would creep into our conversations or situations and have his way with Ray. At that point, we had to tell Jimmy to go away in no uncertain terms. It helped us. Jimmy bridged a gap where the elephant in the room had to be faced, and it made us laugh, and that went on for several years. Life carried on, but there were significant changes to our lives that followed after the diagnosis. Ray had to stop working and driving immediately. I now had to steer us through a minefield of paperwork, look after finances, work, and take Ray to all his various appointments, and try to make life as normal as possible for Ray into this equation. I kept hearing people, like the memory clinic nurse, telling me that I must look after myself. How, I thought, with all this to do, and family and long-standing friends 500 miles away. This is at the point at which befrienders Highland came into our lives. Ray was matched up with a befriender who phoned him once a week, always the same day, same time, and this was the only regular contact he had with a friend, and it's where he learnt to laugh again. And for myself, it took some pressure off and gave me half an hour of quiet time, especially in the early days. Ray went on to have a face-to-face befriender, and that went on even to when he went into a care home. The work these people do is invaluable. And they offer something that gives the carer or the person a freedom to be themselves, and everything that's said is confidential. And also, befrienders are the one agency I know that take responsibility for making the contacts. They do the phoning. They remember the time and the day. And so it's something the carer doesn't have to think about, and it just happens. And it's a true gift. I still have a befriender for myself. During the second year, part of me just wanted to run away from it all. I tried to sell the house a couple of times. And the second time, we did have a buyer, but I had to realize and accept that actually we couldn't move house because Ray's window of opportunity to settle and move had gone. So I also accepted at that point that I could no longer take on Alzheimer's, and I couldn't fight it anymore. It's so much bigger than we are. So I knew that I was to be Ray's companion on this cruel journey. And as long as Ray felt happy and safe in himself, that was all that mattered to me. As a carer companion, it's a privilege to walk alongside Ray and share his journey. I learnt to look for the silver linings, and they are there every day in the small things. For example, one day I came home from work. He met me at the door, and Ray was so excited, and he took me to the sitting room window, busy pointing, and I could not understand what he was trying to show me. Finally, I got it. There was a puddle opposite. And I said, yeah, the sparrows. And it was the fact that there were 8 sparrows in that puddle. It was amazing. He lives in the moment. And on another occasion when we were walking in the forest, I remember asking him how he felt. And he responded after a while, smiling and saying, "Life is very good." I was very humbled. He's taught me so much about living in the moment. If I just stop and watch him for a while, he notices so much in the detail of the natural world of creation. Being a carer for someone with early onset dementia and Alzheimer's, I personally have struggled with support groups. I came to the conclusion that they were not for me. This is because I'm a younger person, and my needs are different to those of older carers. For other people, I know that they are a lifeline. Over time, I've learned the importance of self-care, and I learned to approach life with love and compassion, a more mindful attitude, and keeping my sense of humour fully alive. Sometimes all this is much easier said than done. I have a faith which sustains me through the ups and downs of this journey, and it's an integral part of my everyday life. I had a small job, which was a form of respite for me. Long-standing friends are my lifeline, even though most of them live down in England. They keep me in touch with reality of life and the world we live in. They encourage me to continue with my other interests in life, and they're there to support me emotionally when I fall apart. I learnt not to feel guilty about leaving Ray at home on his own whilst I went out, and accepting that I had to do it in order to survive the journey. Over time, I learnt that when everything went pear-shaped, actually, I was the only one that could change in our situation. I am aware of how fortunate I was, as Ray was a very passive person at home and was able to be left safely. And at that time, we also had a very special and incredibly intuitive dog and so I knew he would be safe. Sadly, over time, we were unable to have the conversations that we used to have, and life at home became a very silent world. Ray now has advanced Alzheimer's, and speech is very difficult for him. Being a carer is very hard and challenging. As a carer, you become the stability in an ever-changing and confusing world for the person you care for. It's a journey full of loss and grief, bereavement, watching the different parts of the one you love fade away and become like a ghost of the person you first knew. I learnt to communicate and talk to my husband in a different way, being person-centered most of the time, so that he could clearly understand what I was saying to him, always answering questions as if it was the first time that it had been asked, when in reality it could have been the fifth or sixth. Having to watch him struggle with finding things or putting things away in the kitchen, learning to recognize possible flashpoints when certain tensions crept in between us, and that usually came in the kitchen in our case. When it happened, I learned to say to myself, what does it matter? And I'd walk out and go into another room for 10 minutes and then go back, by which time it was all forgotten. I learned to accept that Ray would follow me everywhere, or he'd just sit and watch me as I was trying to read a book. Even on holidays, they were not carefree times anymore. For the carer, they can be exhausting. My experiences have taken me to the depths of despair at times, to a discovery of who real friends are, to learning to ask friends for help and admit that I'm not coping well at times, of battling with systems for help, being frustrated when it took nearly 2 years for a CPN to complete the first assessment so that we could then apply to the DWP for help and funding. The next challenge was the paperwork. It freaked me out, and I went to the wonderful folk at CAB for help filling in the forms for the DWP. The last one, I remember, was a 40-page book, and it took over 2 hours to complete, which the lady at CAB said was normal. I was patronized by some professionals who clearly didn't have a good understanding of Alzheimer's, of doctors wanting to prescribe antidepressants when I was not depressed. I was just at the end of my tether, on a very lonely journey, and just wanting some support and practical help, and so the list goes on. It can be a very lonely world as the relationship changes. The person who you shared problems with or sorted problems out with, those decisions you made together, such as going on holiday. There are endless examples. They all become the carer's decision and responsibility to carry forward. The social life you had disappears. People don't ring you up as they used to. I've often thought that if there was a physical side to this illness, I think people would be much more supportive, because there are outward signs. But with Alzheimer's and dementia, there are none. And so people think everything's fine. And some people think Alzheimer's, dementia, Alzheimer's particularly, is a mental illness. It's not. It's a chronic illness. I've observed over time that as a carer, I've been given a label and expectations are put on me by people, which can be very hard and very heavy. When in reality, I've often in the past just wanted to shout out and say, I am a person. I'm a human being doing the best I can in a very alien situation. If the carer feels valued and supported along the way, It helps the person who has the dementia in the end. The pivotal point is about keeping stress to a minimum, not only for the person with dementia, but also for the carer. Ray once said, "Life is very good." And as his carer, as long as he feels that way, all the worries, angst and frustrations, the tears and longings are not in vain. It gave me comfort to know that he was happy in himself. What more could I have asked for? That was and still is the best I can hope for. So we continue walking on this different journey into the unknown, knowing that at the core or soul of Ray is still there, deep within him, even though the memory goes and the brain is unable to function in the same way. There are times of laughter, and I try to live each day a bit more lightly now and not take life too seriously. I can't help but think of how blessed I have been, particularly in the early years. For some carers, it is all so much harder as they struggle with loved ones at home who can be aggressive or violent. Some have to live with locked doors as their loved ones wander off. Others, much older than myself, have less physical strength to cope with the day-to-day demands. I'm also very fortunate that I can drive. Many people have to stop driving and start using public transport to get anywhere. This issue causes many frustrations and huge problems in many areas of the Highlands. People who choose to work as carers are angels to the families of those for whom they care for. Their work is a vocation. They are also the people who can bring out the best in the person with dementia. They switch on the inner lights and get to see glimpses of the person the loved ones once knew and would love to see again. More recently, I have experienced this myself, as my husband went into full-time care early in 2017. After the initial move, he settled well and had some happy times in his new surroundings. As a carer, I had new challenges to contend with. I took him out quite a lot when he went into the care until I became too exhausted to do it. My problem was that there were very few people who visited him, and I jumped into that hole of feeling I had to bridge that gap. After a year in the care home, he was transferred to a hospital, and he has been there for the past 10 months. This has been a physically and emotionally demanding time for me. I've had to do 75-mile round trips to go and see him, never knowing quite how he's going to be, spending time, anything from 30 minutes to perhaps an hour and a half with him, and then driving home with all the emotions that the visit has brought up. I only go twice a week now, partly due to the added travel costs. More recently, I have had to select a nursing home for my husband. Not an easy task when your loved one is a bit younger than yourself. And it's been given me much anxiety. At present, I'm waiting to hear about the funding and the availability of a place for him in the home that I have chosen. I personally have found this all very difficult, isolating, and it's been a lonely journey at times, with not a lot of support around for people with advancing early onset dementia and Alzheimer's. My mother was also diagnosed 2 years ago with Alzheimer's. She's had to make compromises in her life, but at least I know that she's safe, and I no longer have to travel the huge distances down to Lincolnshire to see her, as I did with Ray for over the years, and the travelling always took its toll on Ray. this continual journey through loss and grief, bereavement for the carer. Our worlds become smaller as the illness progressed, which was and still is for me very alarming and a scary place. Having to give up the job that I loved to be Ray's carer, meet his needs, was very hard to do. I then found another little job, which was twice weekly and became my only respite. The employer was flexible and understanding about Alzheimer's and dementia and enabled me to fit in my respite around Ray's needs at that time. So our story continues on. We always walk in hope, though, and we do everything we can to make it better for others. And I would just like to end by just dedicating this one verse of a poem to Ray, who's taught me so much, but also to all the other carers and also other people with dementia. It was sent through to me, a poem just over lunchtime, and I feel it's too important not to share the last verse with you all, which for me just sums everything up. The poem is from a poem called Old Maps No Longer Work, and that's written by Joyce Rupp. It's time for the pilgrim in me to travel in the dark, to learn to read the stars that shine in my soul. I will walk deeper into the dark of my night. I will wait for the stars, trust their guidance, and let their light be enough for me. Thank you.